of course, they just agreed to a $77 billion media rights deal, and they haven't expanded since 2004. And like you said, there are these markets that are hungry for a basketball team, and you'd think that a Seattle team would probably make money at least locally, right? To be honest with you, I've watched Silver's pressers for the last year, and it just seems like it's kind of back and forth. He had one that really focused on international, the European expansion. He had a presser to announce that they were interested in European expansion. Not to say that they were going to do it, but to say that they were exploring it, which is quite strange. But it was really just because they wanted to get people's attention. And so to me, I think they're probably digging into the models. I'm not doing these models on the side, but they're probably trying to see what would be the best course of action.
Want to ask you about the NBA and specifically what was discussed at Summer League with Adam Silver at the Board of Governors meeting. He had a scrum with some media members, and he was asked about league expansion, a very hot topic, of course, which we talked about with the W, but with the NBA as well. He said this. I think we also have this greater obligation to expand. If we do so in a very deliberate fashion, in a way that makes sense holistically for the league, that's really the best I can do. So I've heard very contradictory information with Adam Silver in terms of being kind of bearish on expansion, but yet also wanting to capitalize on the momentum of the NBA. We've heard Vegas floated around. You heard Seattle. I mean, these towns have been floated around for years. Like, how realistic is it for the NBA to expand in this fashion, or do you see most recently with Silver talking about international expansion as well? But he's talked about how that's separate. But is that really true? I mean, there's the NBA is making tons of money, but there's only so much money to go around, almost so much time to go around. I mean, they can't do multiple things at once. So I'm just wondering, to your best estimation, where do you think this is headed in terms of kind of the next steps for the NBA? You think?
It's so confusing. I'll be just like as you laid it out, it's so confusing because the NBA you'd think is a really really successful league. Of course, they just agreed to a $77 billion media rights deal, and they haven't expanded since 2004. And like you said, there are these markets that are hungry for a basketball team, and you'd think that a Seattle team would probably make money at least locally, right? Um, so to be honest with you, I've watched Silver's pressers for the last year, and it just seems like it's kind of back and forth. He had one that really focused on international, the European expansion. He had a presser to announce that they were interested in European expansion. Not to say that they were going to do it, but to say that they were exploring it, which is quite strange. But it was really just because they wanted to get people's attention. And so to me, I think they're probably digging into the models. I'm not doing these models on the side, but they're probably trying to see what would be the best course of action. One thing I will say, the discussion on expansion fees, I think, is going to be very fascinating with the NBA, and I think might be part of this conundrum that we're facing because there was talk that the expansion fee would be $4 billion, and then $5 billion, and then the Celtics were sold for six, and now it's like, is $6 billion the expansion fee? And then the Lakers were sold for a valuation of 10, and obviously that's the Lakers, but when you are getting into these numbers, these $6 billion numbers, you're diluting the pot of people who can afford these teams. And you know, private equity is obviously a hot topic in the leagues right now and whether that's going to come in. But even with private equity, like there's just so much so much difficulty to make that much money in this day and age. So I think that that's playing a factor as well, perhaps. I have no, insider knowledge on this. I'm not talking to Adam Silver's cronies here, but just from what I've been seeing from following, right? Like for a while there was discussion on expansion fees, and then you get these sales. Maybe there's something there.
Yeah, I feel you on the confusion. And I think what makes me concerned is as what I saw with a reporter we talked to, Sean Hyken. He covers the Portland Trailblazers, and he mentioned, what happens with with Trailblazers. I mean, they're up for sale, and I've heard, I haven't never been to Portland, but I heard they need a new arena, and that's kind of been the history of sports. When you don't build a new arena, teams leave. I've seen it from a minor league level to a professional level, so I think that's another bit of concern in terms of you have a core fan base, Portland, who really loves, basketball. They're getting a W team. So I don't know what the intentions are with the NBA overall. It seems kind of skewed and all over the place in terms of their overall vision. I just think that's confusion. Do you know what that is, why that is to your estimation? Is it kind of like they're changing their mind, or what exactly is going on in terms of kind of sharing kind of contradictory information here? Especially when the league is, doing very well in a lot of profitable areas.
Yeah, I think it's probably kind of, Silver's goal has always been global, right? The NBA has always been global. I did not grow up in the US, and I felt like the league I loved was the NBA. And so to give that perspective of globally, the NBA is a monster and they're really milking that. But obviously here you could see it struggling viewership wise, attention wise. But perhaps that's the case, right? I guess from my own estimation, it might be um kind of are like looking internationally is their priority, and perhaps they're not understanding this local market as much, or realizing that regardless of what happens, you're still going to sign a $77 billion media rights deal. So I think that's also part of it, right? Like we can critique the NBA's decision making so much, and then like you said, they're still winning in certain categories. They're still so successful in certain categories. So I always say when it comes to criticizing the NBA, it's like yes, and then you see their deal. It's like I don't know. I don't know how to. I'm sure there are business people who are also looking at it like, what is going on?
Yeah. No, you're right. And I think it, it's tough because I'm in that camp of wanting to criticize the NBA, especially with the finals and especially with like this narrative of like two quote unquote small market teams, but very exciting teams, one with the MVP and another with a fantastic story and, great stars. Even though they're not the sexiest team with the Pacers, I think they still have great storylines. And I think the league sometimes fails to present the grandeur of their premier events, which is the finals, compared to what you see with the Super Bowl or with the World Series. I just feel with those events and even with the Olympics, it may not have the greatest interest in some years, but I feel the grandeur is there. You feel the importance, even if you don't know any of the teams or players or stars. And with I feel with the NBA, it was a crisis online in terms of getting the decals on the court. I mean, that shouldn't be a discussion point in
Yeah.
terms of your premier event. So I just think from a presentation standpoint, I think that's something the NBA has struggled in terms of presenting, its biggest events as huge, as opposed to something that's commonplace, in my opinion.
No, I completely agree with you there. I think, even me, a diehard NBA fan, was kind of, I was at the Pacers finals game and it felt big because Indiana was in love with their team. But like you said, like it when you're actually watching the game, other than the screaming fans, there's no real feel of like this is the NBA finals, right? But again, like maybe, to what we just discussed, you know, right now the NBA is so big in France because of Victor Wembanyama, and we don't see that. But there, it's massive. It's so big. China, it's so big, and now with Hansen Yang, it's probably going to be exponentially bigger, right? Portland is going to make so much money from that. Um, and I think that that's the one difficult part of this is that we are all in American media, in the U.S. media. We don't see how much money. We don't see the dollar figure of the NBA beating the NFL, beating all these other leagues in France, in China, in all India. Um, and they're building more and more, right? They want to make they have a youth league in Africa. They have a league in Africa. They want to get more players from all these other countries around the globe. I'm telling you now, as a Filipino, if we had one Filipino in the NBA, it's over. The whole country is just watching his games all the time, and the NBA is going to make so much money from that one guy. One perspective, we only air like one game a week on broadcast TV in the Philippines. It's the Utah Jazz because Jordan Clarkson is on the team, and he's half or a quarter Filipino. So people here in the US, they don't have that same, you can't see it. But the amount of money that they're probably making by having one player from country XYZ is massive.
Now, that makes total sense, I think, as watching the NBA and just having just the perspective of not always seeing the game globally until I was an adult. I think a lot of fans just take it for granted. Just the NBA is such an American sport. That is not the case. Just watch the Olympics. I think that's very clear. Last question for you, and I promise to let you go. New media rights deal takes effect. NBA coverage is going to change. You mentioned the game being very international. A lot of criticism before. We talked about ESPN, but also TNT as well. But now you have Amazon, NBC jumping into the mix. I know it's fairly early. With both networks are still announcing their broadcast teams in the coming days and months. But as you've seen it so far with the news coming out, what is your estimation of what basketball fans could expect? Is it kind of meeting your expectations in terms of what a positive feeling in terms of the coverage, or are you seeing some moves that might concern you a little bit in terms of what the NBA could look like in the next season from a television perspective?
So there's two things there. The one thing that I say from a positive standpoint is I like NBC's football coverage, right? And they are ideally they want to bring that extra, pizzazz to the NBA in terms of how they make Sunday Night Football, feel like a special marquee pay-per-view type event. And I think that's what they're going to try to do for Sunday Night Basketball when the NFL season is not coming, is not on. So I'm excited to see that feel because, to your point, the NBA has not felt like it's had special events. Can NBC do that, and can they take their NFL model? I think Amazon, a lot of, from what I know, Amazon is Amazon, obviously, and they're new, but they've also taken a lot of the production teams of current companies that have already done this stuff. As far as I know, like a lot of people who work for NBC or Turner are actually working on Amazon in the background. So I think they have that. So from the way that I see their NFL coverage, I'm a little bit encouraged, but I also saw what Windhorse said. I can't verify when he said that or what, but I saw a point that was made that a lot of the people that are being revealed by NBC and Amazon, there's not a lot of like reporters. There's a lot of former players. There's even a few like execs. There's not a lot of Windhorse. There's not a lot of Shams. And it's tough because we are leaning into a media environment that is that way. Say what you want about Pat McAfee, for example, but he gets people on his show, but he doesn't do the same, like, I guess, nuanced reporting that perhaps a reporter does. Pat McAfee makes fun of capital J journalists, and I respect him. I think he grinds, but I still think there is a difference, right? And I think even Pat acknowledges that. Are we losing those capital J journalists for whatever they are? I still think there is value there, and in more objective reporting. I hope to see those in those outlets, but we'll see. If they decide to get someone online. I mean, it's not like TNT necessarily had a lot of those either. But they had Shaq, Charles, Kenny, like and Ernie. Like you can't beat that as well. So, that's the part that I'm a little bit trepidatious about, I'd say.
No, that makes total sense. Colin, thank you very much for joining us. Really appreciate it. Can let our audience know where they can find you on social media, where they can find your work, if you have any upcoming projects for the rest of the year?
Yeah. So you can find me on Twitter. I still call it Twitter or X. Colin C. Salao. That's Salao is my last name. You can find me on Instagram. I post a lot for Front Office Sports there at Colin Salau. But I think, yeah, I'm on Front Office Sports. I write for our flagship newsletter, The Memo. So subscribe on frontofficesports.com and follow us on all social media at Front Office Sports, as well as on LinkedIn, actually. So yeah, thanks for having me, Justin. It was a great time. It was a great discussion.
Yeah, fantastic. Thanks, Colin. Enjoy WNBA All-Star Weekend. It looks to be a pretty awesome time. Appreciate you carving out some space. Thank you, Colin.
Of course, of course. Thank you.